So how did people's capstone video projects go? Video is a very different format to work with than audio. But one of the reasons it's really important is because as you get out into the world and you are trying to promote yourself, successfully argue your ideas, the ability to clearly explain that to people is a really important skill. I have noticed over the years that the people who are most successful are often not the smartest people, but the people who are best at promoting themselves and their ideas. I mean, that doesn't mean they're stupid either. It's just that it's common in computer science for people to take on a quiet role. They want to sit in the corner, they want to write code, they want to play with their computer, they want to do their work, and they don't really want to be dealing with other people. And that's fine, but the limitation there is by doing that, you're making a conscious choice or an unconscious choice. I'm making it conscious here. You are making a conscious choice to let other people dictate what you do. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I know lots of people who are perfectly happy sitting in a corner and building things. And I think that's laudable. But the ability to explain yourself and to communicate your ideas and to promote yourself and your ability to help others is very beneficial. I just started working with a new client here in BC. They're actually in Kelowna. And I'm playing a consulting role. So I'm there for architectural consulting. And they basically have what is effectively a cloud native application. It has some interesting requirements. For example, it has a very high uptime availability requirement because they are actively monitoring airplanes. So they have a very limited tolerance for going out of service, like Azure did yesterday. And an interesting observation in the outage yesterday, did anybody notice that Microsoft was, and many of the services went offline for a while? Turns out that people are also reporting that AWS was down. And that I found interesting because it points to the fact that when we start using multiple cloud services, what we can easily do is build the horror of distributed systems, which is the failure of a component you didn't even know existed means you can't get your work done. So when you start thinking about building cloud-native apps, keep that in mind. When you start mixing and matching things, you have to think about how am I going to deal with when things go wrong. In the particular case I was talking about, their solution to making sure that they had only very short outages, if at all, was they have physically disparate data centers. In the AWS breakdown last week, it was a single AWS region, a single AWS data center that actually broke. A friend of mine who I've mentioned before works at a company called Minted, and he specifically told me, he was the one on pager duty, I mentioned that. He was the one who got calls at 3 o'clock in the morning because stuff wasn't working right because AWS was misconfigured and they were using that particular region. Their order entry system, the customer-facing side of that, was using their own private cloud. The downside to private cloud, the reason a lot of people move from using their own private infrastructure to using public infrastructure is that the utilization is typically below 12%. Literally, you are buying control and availability of the hardware to just you, so you don't have to worry about multi-tenancy, you don't have to worry about lack of control, someone else breaking it, you can break it. So you own that. But it's only 12%. Or less. So you're paying extra to have that control, that flexibility. When you move to cloud, public cloud, the utilization is usually above 50%. And that's one of the reasons they can sell it to you cheaper. And the margins in cloud are very high. So you're now building an app on top of the margins that the cloud people are getting, which is usually in the 40 to 60% range. And you're going to build an app, and you're going to be wanting to hit that 60 to 80% sweet spot. So you can see that, in fact, this means that the ultimate amount of monetization you need in order to justify your product's existence is pretty high. Your cost is already just a small portion of what you're charging your customer, and the people who are giving you that service are already making, the cost to give you your services is very small relative to the amount they're charging you. So there's a pretty big multiplier effect there. All right, logistics, nothing really changed. Peer reviews are due on the 4th, that's next Tuesday. Project 3 is opening. Project 3 formative will be next Thursday. So it's a little bit early. That gives us a little extra time to get back to you. And today's learning prompt is, in fact, a recursive learning prompt. How do I learn how to prompt effectively? So I took this same learning prompt and I said, how do I do this effectively? So I want you to take 5 minutes now and do this on your own. It's going to ask you a question. And I want you to use this 5 minutes to figure out what your answer is to that question, because it's going to ask you, what do you want to do with this? And this time, I'm deliberately waiting because I want you to think about, what do I want to get out of the AI when I ask this question? What can it teach me that will be beneficial to me? Because if I give you a suggestion here, you're just going to simply type it in there. I want you to think about it. What works for you? And maybe you don't care. Then you can just hang out for 5 minutes and I'll give you a suggestion. Right. So, do people find these exercises useful? Because if you're not finding them useful, I can stop doing them. Nobody's finding it useful. Okay. All right. Why is it useful to you?
Because I think like learning how to regulate AI is a useful skill, and it requires iterative engagement with the tool to kind of figure out what the best approach is.
And what the answer is for you can vary from what it is for her. You're going to find that you have a particular style or a way you like to engage with them. When you get back that list of what it suggests as a generic framework, what did you think of what it gave back to you? You already volunteered, so I'll pick somebody else. One of the people who are trying to hide in the back. What did you think of the answer you got back? Did you look at it, or were you too busy, running Pokemon Go?
At the initial start, it's like, oh, what do you want to use it for? So
Right.
just to try it out, I chose like the creative writing one instead of like, I don't know, what was the other option?
Okay.
It's like, is it workflow automation or whatever?
Did you find it useful? And you can say no.
I mean, I haven't actually used it, but I noticed that some parts were like, oh, where it's like, oh, knowledge checkpoint. Can you define the core purpose of a creative task in one sentence? And I'm just thinking it might be hard to determine that, because if I'm the person trying to learn that, I don't know if I've done it correctly or not. And if I ask ChatGPT, it's probably just going to be like, yeah, bro, you did it. So, I don't know.
So that's a question that it's going to ask you at some point in the sequence to see if you're getting what it's talking about. So in essence, what it's doing is it's laying out a formative assessment for you. Right? There's no summative assessment here. You're not getting a grade for this. It is a formative system. It is, let's ask you a question that the AI can then use to tell you if you're getting what you're supposed to be getting at that point. So one of the reasons that I actually chose to go to the University of Chicago for my undergraduate was because I admired the work of a professor there, a man named Benjamin Bloom. And he had developed in the 1970s, so a long time ago, probably when your parents were young, or maybe even before that, it was called mastery learning. And the idea was that people learn in different ways and at different speeds. And if you change the way that education works so that people have time to learn and understand the material before they move on, the people who start out slow and need better understand, they need more time to understand the material, end up catching up and actually doing better in some cases than the people who get it fast early on. Because sometimes the people who get it fast early on are learning it very superficially. And the people who have to go through and iterate. But in the 1970s, it was really hard to do that kind of individualized instruction. It's easy to do that now. We literally have the tools to do now what Benjamin wanted to do in the 1970s and had to do manually. And one of the reasons I like this particular style is because if you engage in it, it's kind of like stretching every day. The first time you do it, you're like, why am I doing this? And then you keep doing it, and then you begin to realize, hey, this is starting to work. I feel better. I don't hurt as much in the morning. I mean, you're not old enough for that yet, but you'll get there. And that's why I think this is an important discipline. And the reason I'm doing this, the reason I'm spending some time in each class having you do this is because, yes, you're looking at it, you're kind of rushing through it, but you're doing it. And it's becoming a bit of a habit. How many of you have actually done this outside of class? Because that's the next stage. You need to say, this is a tool that I can use when I'm trying to figure something out. Because this is not a tool. The way that this learning prompt works isn't give me the answer, it's teach me what I need to know to understand. Give me the answer is the brain rotting problem with AI. And there's lots of stuff in the media about this, about how people are literally just like stopping thinking, because it's very easy to be lazy about this, to say, oh, well, ChatGPT is just simply going to give me an answer. And then you find out that you happen to be a US federal judge who filed orders written by ChatGPT. I just read about that last night. And that was publicly embarrassing. In some ways, it's kind of good that they hallucinate. It forces you to realize that you're going to get about 70% good and 30% crap. And you have to sift through and figure that out. This approach works because you're not directly taking this and turning it in as your own work. You're using this to learn something about the topic. And honestly, if you get 70% of that, you've got enough to have a model. The way that education really works, or it should work, isn't to have you memorize things, it's to have you build models of things. How does this work? The way the human brain works is actually remarkably similar to the way that an AI model works, and that is we build a model in our heads of reality, and then we interact with reality and we evaluate that model based upon what actually happens. There are only really two things that we can do when what happens doesn't agree with our model. Number one, we can adjust our model. That's kind of the iterative learning approach. Number two, we can reject the data because it doesn't fit our model. That is the I've already made up my mind, and nothing you tell me is going to change it model. And both of those are very human responses. And you should choose which one you want to do and make it an active choice. Don't make it a passive choice. I was laughing at the beginning of the lecture because I had this email that said, overdue invoice. And I start looking at this overdue invoice, and it's very clear. I'm like, what is this talking about? And then I get down to where it's $25,700. And it's got a QuickBooks invoice format with it and whatnot. And I'm like, this is obviously a scam. And so I just use Copilot to look at it and say, oh yeah, it's a scam. I mean, I think it's funny that I'm telling you about these scams and about the way that people exploit other people. And this is all automated, right? This is probably just one more cloud app. They're faking Intuit invoices to make you think. And how many of those do they have to be successful in order to pay for that? Well, it's a $25,700 invoice. If you get 1 out of 1,000 invoices paid, you're $25,700 ahead. You didn't spend $25,000 worth of compute to send out those fake invoices. So that becomes a numbers game. Since I wasn't sure that people would actually come up with an answer for the follow-up, I did in fact create one. All right, so if you didn't, this is the second part of this, and I've only been doing one part before. I'm going to do a second part this time. If you did come up with an answer that you want to use it. Otherwise, I'll suggest this one. And this will give you the detailed breakdown learning plan, the one that is customized to what exactly you want to achieve. So we've gone from a generic prompt, and now we've given you the opportunity to specify what you want to take away from this. So it converts that generic tool into something that you can specifically apply to what you need. You can explain how you like to learn. I'm a visual learner. I'm an auditory learner. I like text. I don't know. People learn in lots of different ways. I'm a Socratic learner. There's a good one, because I'm a big fan of the Socratic form. Has anybody ever heard of Socrates? I've actually seen the prison of Socrates. It's in Athens. And Socrates taught using a model in which he didn't tell people the truth. He asked them questions. What's the difference? If I tell you something is true, it's just one more little piece of data floating around in your head that will quickly trickle away because you have a short-term, long-term memory. And things that go into your short-term memory don't tend to migrate to long-term memory unless you keep experiencing them. But if I ask you a question and you spend time thinking about the answer to that question and you come to a realization of what the answer is, it will go into your long-term memory because you spent resources to figure it out. So I want you to take 5 more minutes, and this time either use the follow-on question that I suggested here if you're not feeling it, or build one on your own. So, how many of you chose to use the prompt I suggested? Great. Lots of people to call on then, because I'm going to call on the people who didn't, and I want you to tell me what you did ask. So how about
So something that I noticed in the first prompt was that I'm quite good at the context part. Oh, actually, sorry. Okay, let me explain what the AI gave me from the first part. So the first part, the 5 pillars that the AI gave me was that first. I guess it's going to be kind of a longer. Okay.
That's fine.
Okay. So the first 5 pillars I got, one was the directive, which is what verbs you're using, and sort of what the ask is. That's the first like pillar that you should be good at. The second one is the context, which is what is the world that you're kind of in? What is the context? And 3 is the actor. So this is the persona that the AI takes, and the lens that it analyzes the context with. And then 4 and 5 are sort of are more of 4 is the format in which the AI should respond with, and 5 is the loop, which is how you criticize the AI after its first response. And so something I noticed was that I'm really good at giving the AI context during my prompts, but I'm not very good at giving the AI a persona to analyze the prompt with. Because partially I feel like it's a little weird to kind of like give the AI a persona.
Why?
The AI thinks that this is a really important part of prompt engineering. And so I asked it about, I was just sort of experimenting with different personas and like asking it about how exactly could I use persona to best influence your answers. And it gives some interesting results where like, if you ask it to explain quantum mechanics to you, you could explain it from the perspective of, hey, you're a university professor, explain quantum mechanics to me, or you're an 8th grade teacher, explain quantum mechanics to me. And basically, it will completely kind of change how that response is given and like how it interprets the context of the world and then outputs like a different result. And so that's kind of what I was exploring.
That's actually really, really interesting. You said that you felt it was strange to give them a persona, and I'm curious why you think that.
Yeah, so partially, I feel like a lot of, sometimes there's barriers towards how detailed I prompt engineer, because sometimes it feels a little awkward to sort of get too kind of connected with the AI in a sort of way. And I think part of that would be the whole persona thing, where like, because the AI is, there's a weird like cognitive dissonance, I suppose, between like what the AI is and
What is
I
the
want it
AI?
to be. Yeah.
What is it? See, I'm a systems person, so I observe things based upon what I can see, how they act, how they behave. What I'm not is I'm not an AI developer. I'm not focusing on the machine learning models. I'm looking at what does the system do. And I can tell you, from a systems perspective, it's not uncommon in complex systems to observe behaviors that you did not predict. So an AI person will see what they expect to see. A systems person who doesn't have the same biases they have can stand back and say, what is it doing? Not what do I expect it to do. Remember I said there are 2 models, there are 2 ways you can deal with data that doesn't agree with your model. Well, one way is you just simply reject the data. And that's surprisingly common. People often reject data because it doesn't fit the model. But the reason we use models is because we can't always know exactly what's going to happen. And so what we do is we start with what we think is going to happen, and then we can iterate. In essence, that's really what we're doing with the learning prompt here, is We're giving it a prompt, and then it comes back, it asks us a question, and we are iterating. We are giving it more information for its model. The reason I asked about the persona thing is because I actually have found in my own work with AI that they are remarkably good at role-playing. If you think about it, it makes sense. They've read every piece of literature there is available in print. Anthropic literally purchased books, sliced the covers off of them, and scanned them to feed into Claude, for which they paid $1.5 billion last month. Yeah, it's very interesting. If you read a book, you don't have to pay extra fees for what you retain in your brain, but for an AI, when it reads a book, because we make lots of copies of it. So maybe we only do that when we clone humans. We'd have to pay a fee for the book learning of the cloned human. But the cloned human wouldn't actually inherit what the original human had. So maybe that doesn't apply. I don't know. Very interesting. You can get different answers from the same AI by using different persona. When you you sit there and you talk to ChatGPT, like the friend I was telling you about, who I talked to yesterday, and he says he's still using that same brutal honesty approach and getting very different results. What you're doing is you're asking it to behave in a particular way. Now, if you want to look at that from a more probabilistic mechanism, this is a non-deterministic Turing machine, and we are presenting it with an input string, and that input string will progress through that. It's not deterministic. It isn't deterministic. It's probabilistic. It's a Markov model. It's not it's not a deterministic model. And because it's a Markov model, we go through that model, and each output, each decision, each branch we take reduces the size of the search space. But of course, when you go from countably infinite to countably infinite, it's not really much of a reduction in the search space size, is it? But eventually, so you have the history part. The history part really is just like restoring the context. It puts the LLM in the same place it was before, because that's history. It doesn't get to change that. Those aren't the non-deterministic parts. The non-deterministic part is at the end, where you actually are giving it something new to process, and now it actually has to decide, how do I collapse this infinite space of possibilities into one actual response? I mean, another approach I've been playing with, I haven't taught this one because it's interesting. You can actually ask the LLM to give you multiple potential responses. And I vary this basic prompt. The basic prompt was, give me the 5 highest probability continuations to this question. And it will take everything up to that point, and then it'll take the question, and then instead of just giving you one of the probable answers, it will give you multiple probable answers. And I've actually found that really interesting, because sometimes the lower probability answers are more interesting than the high probability answers. And that can be because the high probability answer is the safe answer. And if I'm doing research, I'm probably not interested in the safe answer. I'm interested in how about if we go in this other direction? And I play with that. So sometimes I say, give me all of the responses with probability greater than 0.01. And it will. It'll actually generate 8, 10, 12 different, I've never seen it do 12, but it'll generate quite a few different responses. And it's like, wow, okay. When you give it a persona, what you are in essence doing is restricting the space of possible continuations. It has read all of the literature. It knows how to play everybody. How many of you know who Tom Bombadil is? Every one of these LLMs knows who Tom Bombadil is. It's a very, very powerful analog. If you tell them about this character, they will know in a way that you don't know. He knows, who is Tom Bombadil? Yeah, you're the one who said you knew. He's in the Lord of the Rings. He's literally in the Lord of the Rings. He is the one creature whom Frodo gives the ring to, and it has no power over him. Yeah, that's fine. It is part of the Lord of the Rings, and maybe one or two of you have actually seen the movies. He's a very interesting character because he is very powerful and chooses not to exercise power. And in exchange, things like the ring have no power over him. What he values is relationship. So if you say, pretend you're Tom Bombadil and you start having a conversation, you're going to get a very different kind of response than if you say, pretend I'm Sauron and have a conversation. And you could do either one of those, and it would take on what it thought was an appropriate role. Thinking is a relative term here, but it would search a different part of the potential continuation space. So this is one of the reasons why persona is important. In some of the work that I've been doing, if I just simply present the question to the LLM, it will give me a curry favor with the human response. But when I give the same exact question to the LLM and say, you are a neutral observer, I get a different answer because that framing, that persona, removes it from the alignment protocol that reinforcement learning with human feedback gives it, which is to be that happy, friendly, chatty, glad-handing AI assistant. And for what I was doing, which is evaluating whether or not a prompt is an attempt to break the LLM before you send it to the LLM, I wanted it to be neutral. And neutral observer framing worked really well. So that's where that role comes in handy. I've also used what I call truth speakers. I've actually asked, like ChatGPT, your role is to be the truth speaker here. And like a truth speaker from Dune, for example, which is a really good model that I know about and it knows about. And it will literally, I can take conversations then between me and Claude and give it to ChatGPT, and it will call Claude when it's doing performative bullshit. You're like, wow, because I framed it, because I gave it a persona. I gave it a specific role to play. Okay, so since most people actually just said they'd used that prompt, or they said they didn't say that they used their own prompt, I'll just move on because I really preferred that. I think that was good. Last time I pitched my idea and no one thought it was a good idea, so I consider it to be vetoed. So I'm here asking you, do you have an idea to replace the project I should use to demonstrate SpecKit? And of course, knowing that people will probably simply say no, I do actually have one, but I didn't put it in the slides that I posted on Canvas. Here's my backup idea. It is an app called Study Circle. And Study Circle is the AI schedule that finds you the perfect study group, automatically balances workload, and keeps you safe from burnout. What do you think? Does it sound like something you might be interested in? How many of you have suffered burnout? Okay, and how many, so the rest of you, no, this is super easy. I am already an artificial human intelligence, and I guess that would be a real human intelligence, and I don't have to worry about burnout. Awesome. There you go. Now we have the shiny, glossy advertising material, courtesy of Gemini. It's actually a piece of HTML, believe it or not, and I just screenshotted it because I'm like, perfect. And it literally created this for me. I didn't have to do anything. I just gave the basic pitch to it, and it said, yeah, let's do that. And it gave me that. Is this something that you might consider using yourself? That was part of the motivation for using this as my backup, because maybe some of you would actually use an app that helped you find people to study with and figure out when you're most productive. You'd consider that? Okay, great. Well, now let's look at it and say, okay, so now you're a VC. Would you look at this and say, I'm willing to sink some money into this project? What's it going to cost me to build this thing? 20 million? 50 million? 100 million? Because it's got AI in it, right? So it's automatically going to be expensive. And it's got AI in it, so the VCs are going to be salivating. Actually, I think they're starting to get a little cynical on that. So you have to go talk to OpenAI and say, this is my idea. And they go, yeah, that's great. Here's $1 billion. Go build it. And believe me, spending $1 billion on almost anything is a lot of work, unless it's AI, in which case then $1 billion, and what are we going to do tomorrow? We won't have run money for lunch. All right, anybody think this is a bad idea? So what would it mean to actually have an app that finds you the perfect study group? What is the size of the perfect study group? I didn't actually know this until I started going through the steps of building this app. Actually, it turns out to be between 4 and 6. There are academic studies on this, so we're using research, actual research, which of course the LLM probably hallucinated, but I'm going to buy into because it's just a demonstration anyway. It probably actually is. That sounds about right. When you ask people to remember things, the magic number is 7 plus or minus 2. And that kind of overlaps with the 4 to 6 thing, so it feels roughly correct. In my own research, my doctoral research, I was trying to make storage search work better. And the observation I always had was returning 50 entries to a human is basically the same as returning 100 million. Because all the human brain is going to see is noise. And the noise likelihood ratio is somewhere around that 7 mark. That's how I learned that the magic number from some paper from like 50 years ago was 7 plus or minus 2. Because I had this whole disagreement with Margot about it, where she said, well, I want to know how long it's going to take you to get that list of the photos on your device that you took. I don't remember what the question was. So I had a query. And on my personal collection, it returned just shy of 1 million files. I'm like, she was like, you have 1 million photos? I'm like, yeah, probably. They're all pictures, PNGs, GIFs, JPEGs, they all count. And returning 1 million, she wanted to know how long it was going to take. Because I know how long it took with Windows. Windows search took what I called time to make a cup of tea. Which means it took so long I thought it was broken, and I went and made coffee or tea or something and came back 15 minutes later, and it was just finishing. Because it really literally thought that I wanted a list of 997,462 files. No. Because when I was doing it, I said, you know what? Don't return more than 50. I could return back in less than half a second, doing exactly the same thing that Windows desktop search took more than 10 minutes to do. And frankly, that more than 10 minutes wasn't useful. I mean, coming back in less than half a second and saying, I think maybe you should narrow this down because there's more than 50. Because I could count, actually. I added the ability to quickly count, so I could tell you how many entries were supposed to be returned. So I could say, in fact, there's going to be 997,432 of these. Maybe we should narrow it down a little bit. Because that was part of the research, is that often when you're looking for something, you want to engage with an AI in a conversation that narrows the search space down. Well, what were you doing? Do you remember? What do you remember about that? And you can say, oh, well, there was a picture of my brother in there, or me or something. And that means then we can actually further narrow it down, assuming that we have that kind of data. But we're already collecting that kind of data. Google will do this with your photos, right? It'll actually tell you which photos have you in them. It will tell you where they were taken, which is funny because if you post a photo on Discord, the picture that will actually appear on Discord later when somebody clicks on it will be different than the picture that you shared. Discord is this whole content distribution network. It's its own little storage engine now. But it takes photos and it strips out location information and it reduces the size of them because they're paying for all that storage. So I already asked you that question. So there are, in fact, a number of resources that are on Canvas that became available at 11 o'clock this morning because why would I let you see them beforehand? And what I did this morning then is I actually went through, worked with Gemini to start building some specs, build a constitution, build a features list, and I said I'm going to use that with SpecKit. And so that's what I've done. And let me, no, that's not what I want. I think, is it this one? Yeah, there we go. All right, and there's kind of smallish, so I'll make it a little bit bigger. And let's see. Yeah, perfect. And so the first thing I did was I said, let's take the Constitution. These are the guiding principles for the development process, this Constitution. And you can see it's one of the documents that I put onto Canvas. And that document was written by Gemini, and then I converted that document using SpecKit into the format that it wants. So it added that to the .specify/memory/constitution.md file. And it had nice principles involved in it, like memory constitution. Yep, there. So, core principles. The primary goal of the application is to improve student well-being, not to maximize time in app. All features must be evaluated against this standard. The system must prioritize recommendations that prevent burnout, balance life activities, breaks, logging off. The system must never use addictive loop mechanics, streaks, notifications in a way that could increase student anxiety or stress. Basically, what I started with is I said, let's actually build this as an app that does what we're telling people it does. What is the problem with this? Very practical, pragmatic, real-world problem that I've mentioned once or twice. You're going to be using AI. You're going to be using cloud services. What is that going to require? Money! Somebody's going to have to pay for these services. Are you going to pay for it because you're an altruist? Right. Maybe you will. And in fact, that's essentially what startup money goes to these days. We're paying for the resources we need in order to demonstrate that we can actually build an app that's useful. But what that means is we at some point are going to have to start adding features to that which we can monetize. So one model is we could keep this constitution and we could charge the students for that. How many of you would pay $20 a month for this? How about $10 a month? How about $5 a month? How about 50 cents? Right. You're like, screw that. No, I'm a poor student. 50 cents could be the difference between me and another ramen noodle. He's laughing, right? But it's sort of the truth, right? 50 cents. And then, you get out of here, you'll be earning, 6 figures, and you'll be like, I wouldn't even bend over to pick up 50 cents if it was laying there in front of me on the street because it's covered in bubble gum. What you're willing to spend will depend upon what your circumstances are, where you are in your life. What will happen to you is you will finish here, you will still not have time, but now your time will be gone because you are spending it doing work for someone else who is monetizing your efforts for more than they're paying you, because otherwise they wouldn't keep you. And you then will still not have much time, but now you'll have money. And what you will often find is there are things that you do differently because now you have the financial means to buy back some of that time. So you have somebody else come in and clean your place. You have someone else cook your food and bring it to you. There's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly reasonable, perfectly acceptable. I'm going to make all this available, by the way. So where I left things off, let's see if I can get back to that. I had actually gone all the way through the task process, the planning process. And one of the things that you do after you generate the list of, so you do a constitution, plan, clarify, because clarify goes through the plan, and I try to make sure, I have found that by making sure I answer all of the issues that are raised up front, I have fewer problems later on. So any kinds of ambiguities in the plan, you fix. It means there are fewer places for bugs to creep in. I should have worn that t-shirt, but I might have already worn it. I have a t-shirt that says, weeks of coding can save you hours of planning. And it's very true. There is this temptation that we've been taught that we should sit down in front of the keyboard and hammer out the solution at the keyboard. And I can tell you from personal experience, often the best insights I get are when I'm thinking about a problem and the keyboard is not in front of me. Because I'm thinking about the problem, not the tools I'm going to use to solve the problem. Here, these are the tools that I use to solve the problem, and yet I still have to step back and try to think about the problem. So I did the plan. I went through, I clarified the plan. I then created a list of tasks from that plan. And then actually, when you clarify the plan, you go back and clarify it again because you've changed it. So I'm very careful about that. I go back, I make sure there's no issues now that have been introduced by the clarifications I added. Then I go to the tasks step, and I generate a list of tasks. Now the task step is where it's beginning to identify specific work items that need to be done in order to build what it is we're trying to build here. And then there is an optional analyze step. And I went through the optional analyze step, and I made sure that all of those issues were addressed that had been identified there, things that were ambiguous in terms of how we would actually implement them. I'm literally at the point now where I can type /implement, specify /implement. So let's see. Now, I haven't actually done this yet. Yeah, implement. There we go. And then this is the part where you sit there and watch paint dry, because, of course, what is it actually going to be doing? It's going to start writing code. It took about 2 hours from initial idea to writing the Constitution. I've gone through this a number of times, so it's getting faster, to converting that into the spec kit format. And now it is literally sitting there building code. It will create tests. It will validate that the code that gets written passes the tests. Now, of course, you have to be careful here. Usually, I didn't do it in this case, but usually I require that it be done via a separation of concern. Don't use the same task to write the code and the test. Just like you wouldn't have the same developer write the code and the test, because they're way worse than you are. You'll at least know that if you're cheating on changing the test so the code passes, you're doing that deliberately. They will just happily do that, because as far as they're concerned, the goal is to get the code passing the test. So if you change the test and the code passes now, it's fine. You know that's probably not a good idea. Sometimes there are bugs in tests, but I don't start off by assuming that the bugs are in my test. I assume that the bugs are in my code, and then I have to see and carefully reconcile that out. And sometimes I'm wrong. How many of you how many of you have actually worked with compiled languages before? Like Go, or Rust, or C, or C++, or C# or Java, or Kotlin, or, okay, there you go. One of my favorite excuses for something not working is there's a bug in the compiler. It's not an uncommon thing for people to say or to claim. And the challenge is it's so rarely the case that when it actually is the case, it's very hard to convince people. And over decades of working on this, when you actually do find compiler bugs, you spend a lot of time demonstrating it really is the compiler emitting bad code. And sometimes it's because it's not even the compiler phase, it's the optimization step in the compiler. So you generate unoptimized code, everything looks fine. But then when you look at the actual binary and you look at the disassembly of the binary, you're going, this code is wrong. I mean, I've literally taught classes where I've taken disassembly. I used to teach Windows kernel debugging, which mostly meant looking at lots of disassembly. And I would show people code that's like 20 plus years old that's wrong and still works. It's one of my favorites. You literally could point to the documentation, the hardware documentation, and say, this never worked the way that they're assuming on any of the hardware they supported. What they're doing was required for a piece of hardware that was 5 or 10 years before when they even started writing. And the reason that happens is because the old code just kept working. Okay, what does it do? Let's see. Oh, it's giving me options. Start with option A. My recommendation, so it does this a lot, right? It gives you very concrete options. And sometimes it's absolutely right. And let's see, so it wants me to do the minimum viable product foundation. So it's going to complete the project setup and do the tooling configuration. And I mean, look, it's going to install Prettier and Firebase and TypeScript and ESLint. Like, I guess it's going to be doing this all in TypeScript. Interesting. It didn't choose Python because I do everything in Python these days. How many of you write TypeScript? How many of you write Java? How many of you write Modula 3? Prolog or Forth? Forth is one of my favorite languages. That's a weird language. It's not quite as weird as brainfuck is, but that was deliberately made to be obtuse. Lisp? Anybody know what Lisp is? Okay. I mean, I worked at Stanford for a couple of years. I actually got to meet John McCarthy. He still had a machine in the basement of the computer science building there. And you probably don't know who John McCarthy is, but the term artificial intelligence was coined by him in the 1950s. So like I said, this is sort of like watching paint dry. Oh, look at that. Is it already done? No, it's still running. And it will take a while. I've actually been thinking about this. So what I'm probably going to do is I think I'm going to try and actually record a session. And then maybe if I'm really feeling ambitious, I'll go in and cut out all of the pieces that are boring like this, the paint drying sessions. Or I'll just simply post it and you can fast forward through them. I could actually add just markers in the video, right? That's probably easier than actually editing it out. But the point is, if you're not using these tools this way to build the code for your projects, you're doing yourself a disservice because you're spending a lot more time doing something that is now like the equivalent of digging post holes when there's an automatic post hole digger for you. How many of you have ever actually used a typewriter? Two people. So in computing, there's this interesting debate on whether or not a line ending is a carriage return or a carriage return in a line feed. And so a carriage return was in fact going back to the beginning of the line, and a line feed was advancing the roller of the typewriter to the next line. And so when you used a manual typewriter, you literally pushed this thing and it did both. But you don't really need both of those on a computer, do you? But they represented different things. And so this is why, to this day, we have one branch that went off on it's both rolling the paper up and moving the carriage back, and the other one which said, come on, it's just a line feed, we're just going to the next line. And that will cause you all sorts of grief as you work between Windows and Unix, any Unix-derived system. I mean, I'm not going to do much more with the drying paint thing here, but I think I mentioned actually, it's very interesting that the two operating systems that are used predominantly on modern devices were presented at the same session of the same conference in the same year, obviously. 1973, the Symposium on Operating Systems Principles. The Unix operating system was presented, Unix version 4. I'm not even old enough to have worked on 4. The very first thing I worked on was version 6. Most everything that we have is a derivative of version 7. So if you have a Mac, underneath, somewhere buried inside of the guts of the Mac is Xinu, which is Unix. It's a Unix variant. If you're using Linux, then Linux is not Unix, but it is built to be largely compatible with Unix. And many of the tools that you can use on BSD Unix and Linux are the same GNU tools that you built all along. And Windows was the different option, and that was the Experimental Kernel OS Domain Architecture paper, the same conference, same time. Sort of weird that these things emerge like that simultaneously from multiple different sources and affect our world that way. And that's your historical lesson on systems, because I'm a systems person, right? All right. Does any of this make any sense? I mean, I literally just took that checklist I've been giving you, and that's all I did here. I wrote those initial documents. You know what I want to do? I want to show you, while it's off doing its thing. See, I want to show you the next couple of steps in this process, because these are in the documents that I've shared with you. Let's go F11 there. Study circle, CD project study circle. It's not here because I didn't get it. I haven't even made it this far, but push the CPSC 436 lectures 2025-10-28. So what I suggested to solve a revenue problem was, in fact, so we did this business model. There's a business model analysis. Of course, I created PDFs, which is what's actually posted there. And so this was, how do we make money from this thing? And so the idea was that you've built an MVP. Now you can demonstrate the basic functionality that you're trying to get the students, to say, wow, this is really cool. And then it's, okay, so how do we pay for this? And here's the part that most people don't do. How does this change our constitutional principles? Think of this as logically, we need to add ways of making money. How do we change our terms of service to satisfy the adaptations we need to make to our principles in order to make that money that we know that we have to make? So we weaken things. So the original was the system must never use addictive loop mechanics. And then it says the system must never use addictive loop mechanics unless those notifications are directly related to providing opt-in value-added services. Okay, so we're giving people the option of getting the addictive game-playing behavior that will keep them in the app so that we can show them more ads. And these are the kinds of explicit trade-offs that we have to make. And so the idea is that what I want to do is I want to keep working on this. I want to take this, build it to the next stage, move on, and then show you now we take this constitution, we revise things, we go back and we say now we can add some more features. These are the features that are going to actually pay the bills. So the first product we build is what we're going to show to the VCs who are going to give us the money to build the second version of the product or the extension of the product. And now we add the monetization piece. And then someone comes up with a clever idea. Let's see, which one is it? It's the feature. They say, okay, so we have a problem with the current study group matching algorithm, and that is it's based on just simple things like shared classes and user-reported free time. But that's not as effective as we could be. What we could do in order to understand how to match people better is we could gain an insight into their personalities, into their learning mechanisms. How do they learn things? How likely is it they're going to be to actually get along? You don't want monocultures in your study group. You actually want people who have different perspectives than you do, because that's going to end up helping you do better in the class. And after all, isn't the goal in classes to maximize your grade? I mean, it's a min-max model, right? It's just like gaming. It's exactly the same thing, right? You want to maximize your grade because that is the reward that you get. So the idea is that when you first launch the app, after we add this feature or the first time you use it, we just go through a basic personality profile. We ask you some questions about, your style of learning and whatnot. Does this make sense to anyone? Does it sound unreasonable to anybody? But we are collecting some additional PII now, so we need to be sensitive to that. So that means that we're going to have to make sure that we continue to protect our users' interests. So, this has got a nice list of things, and it talks about how we're going to have to amend our how we already amended our Constitution to do the business side of this, and this doesn't really require any big changes to that. So we talk about the risks, and now we actually have a way that we can add another new feature to Study Circle, which is going to make it more useful for our users. And because it's now more useful, you start using it, you go, this is a really helpful app, it's been great for me. And you tell your friends, and they tell other friends. And I can't think of anything that's ever spread by word of mouth like this before. Can you? How many times have you actually considered something because someone else told you that it worked well for them? Right. Word of mouth is still today, is the most effective form of advertising because it's someone you already know telling you that something they found useful that you might want to consider. So that cuts through the noise. This is why things going viral is so incredibly important. So what is it we want to do with Study Circle? We want it to go viral. We want people to be doing TikTok videos of this going, this is the greatest thing ever. And so it burns through UBC, and then people at other universities start noticing, and they start picking it up, and it burns through them as well. And what happens is that over the course of 9 months, you go from having a few hundred users to having a few 100,000 users. And now your revenue model makes sense. You're paying for the resources, you're making enough money that you can keep working on Study Circle, you can build it out. Maybe somebody, you hired a really good vice president of business development, and what they did was they started convincing universities that this was such an important feature of quality of life that they should license it for use by all the students. Now you're in the big leagues. But universities are kind of cheap because they don't really want to spend very much there. So maybe what you do is universities don't want to do that, you have an advertising model. You show people ads. That's a very classic kind of monetization. And then you take another couple rounds of VC funding. And now, because you want to keep adding features, you want to keep making this better, you want to advertise it more so more people are using it so that your overall coverage, your market penetration is better and better. Can you think of anything else you might want to use? How else could you monetize this? How else could you be paying for these things? And hey, you've put a lot of hard work into this and you deserve to be paid for that. You deserve to be rewarded for the work that you've done, for the hard work and the investment and the critical thinking that you've added to this project. What other data do you have? What else could you do with this? I mean, you've got personality profile data now. You have location information. How about if we anonymize the data? Because we don't want to sell the data. We don't want to be Flow Health. Let's anonymize this data and license it to data brokers. Okay, it's another small change to our constitution. But because we can tell users, we can tell the people who are adopting our app that we're anonymizing, we'll use anonymized versions of the data and share it with selected third parties. Of course, our selection criteria might just simply be, do they have money? We don't have to actually reveal that. But you're still in control. So you can still make sure that it obeys what you think are the core principles here. Is this a reasonable trade-off? I mean, it is the trade-off that you will probably end up making more than once in your life. Is this a reasonable trade-off to make? I don't know. There isn't actually a right answer here. That's the problem with this. That's why it requires critical thinking. You have to keep thinking about this. And if you think about this in the I don't want to do harm to others model, then you're going to be saying, okay, that's cool. You know, we can share some of this data with people because that will enhance the services that we can offer them. It will make the advertising that is paying for them to be able to use this, it'll make the ads more relevant to what they are doing. We will reward them by convincing them that if they recruit their friends to the platform as well, we'll give them something of value. Maybe we create a premium model of this so that you can get the ad-free version. Those are all going to be reasonable things to do because they all pay for the services, they pay for the development, they pay for the resources, and of course, they pay your rent. And maybe you'll get to that point where the rent happens to be on your yacht. Because Study Circle has become so wildly successful, and it's this really cool AI tool. OpenAI starts looking at you and saying, this is great, we're interested in buying you out. And then Apple says, well, gee, we don't want OpenAI to be controlling this. And Anthropic says, maybe we can scrape up something here. And Microsoft comes along and says, that's pretty cool. And then you learn that NVIDIA is looking at branching out in this area. How many of you would be tempted to sell Study Circle if it was yours and they were offering you $1 billion or more? How many of you wouldn't be tempted by that? There you go. And now you understand why, despite the best intentions, these end up turning into monetization machines. You're monetizing people who were your friends. You're done. You finished university. You don't care, right? You're not monetizing your friends anymore. You're monetizing their younger siblings. And then in 20 years, you'll be monetizing their kids, or 30 years. You'll be monetizing their kids. It's okay. It is the way of the world. All right. Is it still going? Oh, I don't know, because it's on the other screen. Let's see. There's probably a way of maybe Control Tab? No. Oh, that would be too easy. All right, let's see. Let me go back and look at where did it go? Huh. I'm not actually sure how to get out of that. Okay, let me see. I'll just exit out of here because that doesn't matter. I don't know what it's doing. I don't usually put it in full screen mode, so this is kind of interesting. Very strange behavior. All right, well, I was hoping to show you what it was actually doing. I don't know what it's doing. Okay, and done.